Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land, and welcome to another episode of Tristan and the Classics. It's a new year, 2022, and I have some upcoming goodies for you, but this video is just to round off last year. It's my December reading wrap-up. Read 4 pretty good books in December, and I hope you enjoy my synopses of them. So let's get stuck in, shall we? The first book that I read in December of 2021 is Somerset Maugham's The Painted Veil, and what a brilliant piece of work this is. I highly recommend you read this book. Maugham has got a brilliant way of writing. I hadn't read Maugham for, well, until last year, and then began reading a number of his things, and wow, I just love the crispness of his writing. It's got passion, it's got firmness, but it's so slick. It really just rattles along quite quickly. And considering in this book there's not a great deal that happens per se, it keeps you engaged brilliantly. So the story itself is about a girl called Kitty Fane, and she is, you know, growing up in London, and she likes high society, she likes flirting with the boys, but she doesn't want to commit to anybody. And there's a lad there called Walter. Actually, her name's not Kitty Fane at this point, his name is Walter Fane. And he likes her, but he's a bacteriologist, so, you know, not scintillating, and no offence to any microbiologists out there, just the stereotype, you know, the sciencey nerd, not exactly the rakish guy that all the girls want to be with. Anyway, she suddenly realises that her younger sister is about to get married, and this Walter Fane has said that he likes her, and so she goes, okay, I'll marry you then. And then shortly after, they go out to Hong Kong, where he's working for the British government, or Ching Yen as it's called in the book, because Maugham wasn't allowed to actually say Hong Kong because people would get upset, they might take his book personally. Anyway, what happens right at the off, you realise that there is an adulterous liaison between Kitty and a chap called Charles Townsend, who's a government official. And the reason is Kitty finds Walter boring. He seems aloof, he seems to have a condescension to people who are not as intelligent as him. There's nothing wrong with him, but he's just a bit dull. And she likes the high society, and she doesn't really like being intimate with Walter. And the opening, when Kitty and Charles are together, and you realise it's an affair, is so creepy because they hear the doorknob turning on one of the patio windows, which has got shutters on. And you're like, ooh, this is spooky. You wouldn't want to be caught in the act, would you? And then a bit later, another doorknob turns because they're all locked. The way it progresses is Walter clearly knows Kitty has been unfaithful to him. And so he says, I'm heading out, I'm going into China, or he actually says we. She says, who's we? He says, you and me, we are going to China where there's this cholera epidemic, and I'm going to help people there and do research. And she's like, I'm not going there. He says, you either come with me or I out your affair into public. I will call it, I'll ask for a divorce in court, and I will make known that it's Charles Townsend that you've been having this naughty tryst with. And she goes to Townsend, and he thinks, yeah, it's a good idea that you go with him, to be quite honest. And she's quite shocked at this. Now, as it progresses, you'll find that from being a socialite and being bored, which is a common thread in sort of upper middle class and high society, she starts to find a purpose when she goes to a nunnery to help with the children and to help look after those who have got cholera. And it gives her meaning. Now, although with the nuns, who she admires for their faith, she doesn't feel that what she's done is a sin. She's not particularly a believer in God, but there's a purpose given to her life. And you just see how that unfolds. And I'm not going to tell you a number of things that happen regarding her relationship and whether she gets back with Walter or not. But it's a very revealing book about the inner workings of the human spirit, the spiritual side of us that needs feeding. Because you'll notice with a lot of Regency books and a lot of 1920s, post-World War One books, you find this all-pervasive lethargy, this ennui, where people, they can pursue spectacular things and pleasures and society and excitement, but they're permanently bored. And yet going to a place where she can do relatively little, a place with a cholera epidemic in China where she doesn't speak the language, she finds something more deep within herself. And how it ends is interesting too. So I really recommend you read The Painted Veil. I haven't given you a lot away about this book. Don't expect great things to happen. Don't expect fireworks whiz bang. The film itself has the revolutionaries of China invade the town and everything. That's not in this book at all. The film and this book are very far apart. But it does make you think. There's something that just touches you inside. You recognise you've just read something great. The next book that I read in December was Homer's Iliad, that great epic of the ancient world. And it was a rather interesting and entertaining read, although somewhat repetitive. The Iliad covers the Battle of Troy and the fall of Troy to the Greeks, or the Achaeans as they're frequently referred to, because you know that knobbly bit at the bottom of Greece, where Corinth sits in the middle. That's called Achaia. So the Achaeans, they're Greeks. It's what's south of the Corinthian isthmus. Don't you hate that word? I like the way it's spelled, I-S-T-H-M-U-S. Looks lovely, but to say isthmus is a bit awkward. Anyway, back to the story. So you've got the great warriors in here. Agamemnon, who leads the Achaeans or the Greeks. He's there. You've got Diomedes, another great warrior. You've got Hector of the Trojans, the champion of the Trojans. You've got Paris, who, interestingly, Paris is a bit of a Nancy in this book. He goes into battle, but he's got like flowing blonde locks and all the girls love him and he likes his luxury. And Hector, his brother-in-law, is always having a go at him for being late to battle. And then, of course, you've got the mighty Achilles. And the book starts off with Achilles getting the hump. So Agamemnon, who's leading the Greek coalition against Troy, he decides he wants more plunder from what's already been taken and decides he wants to take some more stuff off his followers. And one of the things he wants to take is Achilles' girlfriend or wife, someone that belongs to him, being a captor of war, and she seems to like Achilles, which is handy. But Agamemnon says, no, I want her. And Achilles says, for goodness sake, how dare you? Right, I'm not fighting anymore. And so for like over half the book, Achilles just sits in a tent while there's great battles going on between the Trojans and the Greeks. You see in here, the reason this is a tragedy is because of the fickle nature of the gods, that humans are at the whims of the fates and the gods. You see, when the Trojans start succeeding in the first battle, because most of this is just describing battle endlessly, with short breaks in the evening. The Trojans are winning, and then suddenly one of the gods, and I think it's Ares, so Mars in the Roman pantheon, the god of war, he decides to support the chap Diomedes. And suddenly Diomedes can't fail. Wherever he goes on the battlefield, he's knocking people's heads off. And it's interesting, whenever they fight, there's these regular phrases like, and he fell to the floor, the bronze ringing on his body. Everyone who dies has the bronze ring on their body. That's the chest plates and the helmets that they've got, and the bronze greaves upon the legs. But the gods can make someone impervious. In fact, some of the gods become visible during the battle, and if they're not mighty, like there's this young girl, she gets chased by someone and hit with a spear, and it really hurts. Now, it won't kill her, but it hurt. And she has to fly off back to Mount Olympus, where she gets to eat ambrosia, the ambrosia of the gods, and she gets her wound treated. Zeus interferes an awful lot. He decides, I want the Trojans to win, and so he begins blessing them. There's arguments amongst the gods all over the place. But what I love is just these phrases that are used throughout the book. So I mentioned the bronze ringing on the body. There is the darkness fell upon the eyes from which there is no awakening. That's when you're dead. This happens to loads of people. Whenever they pop their clogs, down goes the darkness that they can't waken from. It's very specific on where people get injured. You know, Diomedes, or Aias strikes out at someone, and it says, and the spear pierced to the top right of the left nipple. So pretty much the centre of your chest. Or a sword would enter from underneath the head, and the brains were scattered within the helmet. This phrase is used a lot when anyone's stabbed in the head. The brains were spattered in the helmet. And everyone seems to be carrying a long shadowed spear. So I take it that's a really long spear, but both sides have long shadowed spears, and it makes you wonder which side the sun is on. But two of the things that really get me the most, I really love this, is how they nicknamed the characters. So Agamemnon, in multiple places I think it says, he of the 7-layered shield, he of the great shield. So evidently he had a very big shield and 7 layers of leather and bronze, which frequently the spears just went straight through. But he's known for this. And then you've got Hector of the flashing helmet. Every time Hector comes up, he's of the flashing helmet. So it makes you wonder about it. He's got like a police light on his head running around the field. There's Hector of the flashing helmet. Achilles, the swift of foot, or the swift of heel. He's constantly referred to like that. And they've all got these names, and I just love the idea that that they've got these sort of taglines to their names, like superheroes fighting. And when they meet in battle, Homer tries to give you a background to the characters that are fighting. And it's remarkable how many times, instead of meeting just an ordinary person, the heroes all meet one another. And one time, I think it's Diomedes, he meets a fellow, and Diomedes is on a roll. The god Ares, the god of war, has backed him, and Diomedes is on the Greek side, and the Greeks are winning, and Diomedes is killing everyone that comes in his path. And he meets this chap, and he's like, I don't know who you are. Tell me your history. So they stop in the middle of the battle, and he has a big chat about his background. And at the end of it, it's like, wow, that's really good. Nice to meet you. Ever so sorry, I'm going to kill you. And then kills him. And the bronze wrung around his body, and the darkness descended on his eyes, from which there was no awakening. And I think he was pierced somewhere between the belly button and the bladder, which we're told by Homer is the most painful place to be struck. But the other thing that's interesting is the way that rewards are given out in the Iliad, specifically tripods. There is a real thing with the ancient Greeks about tripods. Agamemnon, when they need to push forward, to push the Trojans back, he shouts to whoever can kill Hector, I will give him some slave and a tripod. I mean, just to sweeten the deal. There's so many tripods offered. I do wonder what they did when they got home. You imagine that the missus, how did it go out there today? Oh, brilliant, got another tripod I did. You're kidding. Well, you can never have too many tripods, can you? I don't know what they did with all these tripods. But anyway, the Greeks seem to be quite addicted to them. Ah, Stavros of the steel-panned head. Here, have a tripod. You've done amazingly. Oh, I say now, this one's an absolute delight. I mean, look at it. It's got one of those wiggly things that winds it up and down. The missus is going to love this. The neighbours will be so jealous. You get a great insight into the argumentative and combative nature of the gods in the Iliad as well. Zeus eventually decides that the Trojans are going to win. And he tells all the other gods to stop interfering with their aegises. They're constantly running around with an aegis. An aegis is like a cloak or a shield. And so they're invisible. And for instance, we take Diomedes or Hector. Okay, Hector runs into the Greeks and he's fighting left, right and centre. No one can get him. And then an arrow is shot towards him. But an aegis from Hera, Zeus's wife, is put in front of him. So somehow the arrows don't hit him, makes him impervious. So there's a lot of aegises around the field as well. But Zeus just says, everyone clear off, I'm going to make the Trojans win. Stop interfering, because you know I could kill you all if we had a fight. So they all go in a huff, and Poseidon and Hades, who were Zeus's brothers, they're not very happy about this. But what can you do? Zeus is too amazing. And then Achilles gets interested in the fight. Now Achilles is on the Greek side, and Zeus has been saying the Trojans are going to win. But as soon as Achilles joins the fight, Zeus likes Achilles, and so he thinks, I'm going to make Achilles win. And that's how the Greeks end up going to Troy and smashing it up, you know, eventually getting into the Trojan Wars, etc., etc. Something you don't have in the Iliad, Achilles is not shot in the heel by Paris. I found this to be a surprise, and the story of Paris shooting Achilles in the heel comes from a later Greek writer. I think it might be Sophocles, but I'm not sure. But yeah, so Achilles doesn't get shot in the heel, would you believe, by Paris, not in the original. It's sort of a sequel where he gets hit in the heel. And when they get in there, naturally, there's more tripods given out. I say, Achilles, old fellow, you've done a sterling job today. I tell you what, here's another tripod. You deserve it. Oh, I say, Agamemnon, that's just very good of you. Oh, look at this. Extendo legs. Now, I do like that. So, would I recommend you read the Iliad? It's one of those books I think you would do well to get under your belt just to say you read it. But, yeah, I didn't find it particularly spectacular, but certainly entertaining. The third book that I read in December was Joseph Conrad's Victory, and you know I like Conrad if you've watched me for any length of time. I really like this. In some respects, I would say, maybe alongside Nostromo, this is the most accessible of Conrad's books, but still deeply meaningful, thought-provoking. Conrad is never in a rush to describe his tale. Now, in this book, it's set in the Malay archipelago, so across in Southeast Asia, where Conrad spent a lot of time himself as a sailor, because he worked in the merchant navy. And we have the story here of a chap called Axel Haste, who is a curious chap because he's got a philosophy of being separate from the world around him, not investing into anybody. He's just like this drifter who moves through life doing things, but he doesn't want to become connected to anything. He doesn't want to make emotions of his own connect with the world. So neither will he fear, nor will he fall in love, nor will he try to make great friendships, nor will he seek revenge. He thinks that life is just something that you've got no control over and you shouldn't let it impinge on you. You shouldn't invest too heavily in it. Which makes him a solitudinous character, which is sort of the motif of all of Conrad's works. This solitude, with maybe the exception of Secret Agent. So being solitary is something that really speaks to Conrad. But in this book, for a start, someone attaches to him. He helps a guy out who's in need, not because of any feeling of compassion necessarily, but just because he could. And this chap sticks with him then. But later on, that chap goes home to England and dies because of getting a cold. And there's another fellow in this area called Schomburg. He's a German chap and he's absolutely awful. He's a horrid fellow and he doesn't like Haste at all. And there's no real reason for this. This is what's so great. It's an arbitrary hatred. This Schomburg has built up a real dislike of Haste for the primary reason that Haste has never stopped to stay at his hotel, because Schomburg runs a hotel. And Schomburg can't help but always be gossiping and libeling Haste to his guests. And then up turns two interesting characters. One's called Plain Mr. Jones. And you know something's wrong with them. They're sort of like gangsters. And Schomburg tries to poison their ears towards Axel Haste because something's happened at this point. Haste has met a girl in need who was sort of working for the theatre near Schomburg, and Schomburg had fallen in love with her and was lascivious and leering at her all the time. She was uncomfortable. And so Haste took her and ran away to this island where he used to stay, and he's happy to just live in isolation. Now Schomburg tells Plain Mr. Jones and his henchmen that Haste has got money buried on the island. And they are all about getting money, an easy target. And Plain Mr. Jones is extremely clever and scary. And the guy who's with him is just a cold-blooded killer who will do whatever Plain Mr. Jones says. And so they set off to find Haste, who will only be on the island with this one girl. And they just think this is great. And you then, for, I would say, the last third of the book, you have Plain Mr. Jones and the two guys who are with him. They roll up at the quay of this island, but they had almost missed the island, so they're dehydrated. And they find Hastings there. They don't see the girl, but they also notice that there's a Chinese man there as well. And so they want to bide their time. They want to find out where Haste has buried his treasure, where his money is kept, before they can get the money and then just kill him, because that's all they're going to do is kill him. But it doesn't work out as you would imagine. And so you have this story of true love, maybe, because Haste can't help but feel for this girl that he saved. And he says to her that, I don't try to get entangled with people. And there's this genuine love, this genuine humanity, but all against this backdrop of what is life, ultimately. The very, very last word in this book is nothing. And it's said by the chap who's relating the story. And that word, when you get to it, I would suggest that you don't just go away and do anything, but you read Conrad's works and you get to the end of the book. You need to stand and think, why does that make me feel like I do? Why do I feel there is something great inside the way this book ended? What am I learning about life? How do I fit into the cosmos? You see, we all have our own beliefs and ideas, but what you're doing with Conrad is he's putting forth his own exploration of meaning and existence. And when you read a classic book like this, you're being asked to engage with him. And it's very moving. It's one of the great reasons for reading the classics. These are not read as much as they should be. They're not studied at school. And people leave, and when I say people, I'm talking very generically. Lots of people lead a fast but vapid existence, never stopping to really ponder on what truly matters. This book makes you do that. It's slow-paced, but very, very, very worth the read, and with some of the most beautiful prose. Beautiful. I mean, Conrad is an expert at poetic writing. So that was the third one. Victory by Joseph Conrad. I really do recommend it. So the fourth book that I read in December was a very, very interesting book called Yellow Crome by Aldous Huxley. I have a picture of it here because I read it on Kindle. That's why I'm not holding it. So Yellow Crome, set in a mansion called Crome, and you just follow a couple of days. It's the higher upper class, upper middle class to, upper class. And you just have these interactions of different characters. Now, Aldous Huxley is very interesting as a writer because he doesn't necessarily build great characters, nor does he have strong plot all the time. He tends to anthropomorphize or epitomize a idea or a quality or a worldview, an outlook, and turns it into a character. And so what you have is people's perceptions of the world bumping into each other because they all represent something and you see how they interact. And he's fascinating in that respect. Some people criticize him because they say, well, the plot suffers, but he's just exploring an idea. Now, what's particularly interesting about Huxley is he notices something. You'll get this from, like Somerset Maugham earlier, you'll get this from a lot of the post-First World War writers, is the overall malaise of the middle to upper class. They want to experience life, excitement, novelty, but end up really bored. And there is this almost philosophy of meaninglessness, because you have to remember there was a proper kickback against the establishment after World War I. Millions of young men, and hence a lot of young girls' sweethearts, had been sent to be butchered on the battlefields of France. And the old guard, their answer to, men going over the top and being mown down was, let's send more men to be mown down. Eventually we'll get through. And the church was sending people as well, saying it's great, God will be with you to fight the Germans. And the scientific and academic establishments were sending people as well. This is progress. So what happened is after all these millions of men die, the younger generation in particular, to the middle-aged, they are like, we're sick of the establishment. this is a load of rubbish. Look at what it's just produced. Life is short. We're going to enjoy it as much as we can. We're going to throw caution to the wind. And that's where you get like the flappers and jazz and everything that comes out of this. But you get that in this book. You get these different characters. So you have one who's really pretty. And all the boys love her. And in fact, the main character, he likes her too and he wants to be noticed by her. But she sort of friend zones him. She likes him, but she never thinks of him that way. But he has this sort of carpe diem moment where life is short, I need to just say that I love you. And then there's other chaps that appear who are philanderers. They come in, one of them in particular, he comes in, there's a nighttime walk down to the beach and, you know, somebody runs too fast and crashes into another person and there's a bit of frolicking kind of thing. But when he's had his fun, he moves on to another house. He says, oh, I've got to go, I've got to see someone else. And the girl knows it's another girl, but she doesn't despise him for it because that's life. Others are looking at the mystical, the afterlife, spirits and all that kind of stuff. And there's a surge of interest in that. And there's an older gentleman there who is an authority writing books on all this. And it's because people are turning away from the traditional religious, the typical governmental, societal ethics, science itself, technocracy, all of that, they're saying that hasn't worked. So they're either trying to find meaning or have come to accept that meaning doesn't exist. And it's bleak in that respect. But the way Huxley writes it doesn't make you feel depressed. You're just spending a few days at this one manor house, Crome, and seeing the different characters talk. And interact, and they've all got their own little interests. The main character is a poet, but he wants to write a book, and someone says to him, oh, what's the book about? A down and out author who needs to make good because he fancies a girl and he wants to win the girl and he has to make good at the end. And the irony of that is that's exactly what this lad was about to write. But the irony is also that Huxley knows that that's what people are doing in real life, but there's no ultimate meaning to it. You know, it's just this staid, bored rhythm. And you get this constant sense of lethargy that's in there, this constant just emptiness of character, a desire to be excited, but when there's nothing novel, nothing really whiz-bang, people are bored. Others look back to the past. There's an interesting section where there's a guy who does the history on Crome. He lives there and he's like, oh, let me tell you some of the history. He talks about the toilet system, why the toilets are on the top floor, not the bottom floor. And you think it's sort of pointless, but it's got a point. This is a person who is no meaning now, but he looks fondly back on the past. He throws his imagination that direction. And then they open up the grounds for a village fete where people have a great time, except the main characters, who all work as servants on the day to give stuff to the villagers. But the question Huxley's asking is what is this? What's the purpose? Where does life go from here? I'm not saying Huxley himself is thinking that, but it's what he's observed of his generation. And he has a very unique way of getting into things. So if you want to go into a book for plot, Huxley generally is not your character. But if you just want life in its reality, sort of, not grim reality, just its mundanity, sort of the moribund existence of a people who place their only hope in material things, then Huxley is someone you should read. It really was an interesting read. And I would recommend it to others. It's a quick read as well. But if you do read Huxley, if you have read Yellow Crome, come back and leave a comment on this. What did you think of it? So there are the 4 books that I read in December of last year. They were, let's see, Painted Veil, Iliad by Homer, Victory by Comrade, and Yellow Crome by Aldous Huxley. What are your plans for the upcoming year? Let me know down below which books you want to read. And just a reminder, keep your eye out for any notice I give on Instagram or on this channel about the upcoming read-along of the Radetzky March in February. Until the next time, I wish you joy in your reading.